there's so much AI content out there, you don't even know what's real and what's not, that our authentic stories are needed now more than ever. But then I had people ask me, can you use AI to help with your stories? And my initial response was no, that would be cheating. It wouldn't be authentic. It wouldn't be real. And I thought, if I'm sort of the expert on this, maybe I better actually start to test it. And I was disarmingly surprised how good AI was with generating stories. And while it was good, it lacked something.
Welcome again to the Business of Marketing. I'm A. Judge,
And I'm Rocio Osuna.
and today we're going to help you gain some clarity on how to get better at creating content without giving away your company's soul to AI. So let's go.
So today, a topic of AI slop. It's prevalent everywhere. It's prevalent in storytelling to some folks. So I went to a conference and there was a really good topic that brought up about AI slop. It talked about AI content sounding the same and the keyword being content assembly line, reminding me a lot about Fordism and how that really is a structure that AI slop follows. What do you think, Lee?
It's interesting. I'm talking about a lot of that coming up, and I had to edit some of the titles of my talks because they sound like I'm promoting those assembly lines, like AI, like content at scale or content creation with AI at scale. But I have to back up and explain, no, if you listen to what I'm teaching, it's about adding in the human part while still having scale. So do any of those articles, or what are your thoughts on the possibility of, and I'm a strong advocate of this, you can still have quality and quantity at the same time.
So I feel like, AI is everywhere. There's no stopping it. But I'm a firm believer that, we have our own stories and using AI as ideation is supreme. AI doesn't know you. You have your own voice. So having it as a way to kind of tease out your ideas, maybe titles that you're talking about, that's a great way to really be efficient with your storytelling. Not necessarily use it to tell your story, but more so kind of give you ideas of, okay, I missed something about that story, maybe put it in. Here's an ideation.
Yeah, you use the word efficient because, like, I use an app called Whisper app, and it's there's so many ways I'm using AI that's not actually creating the content. I think that's what people mistake, is that you're using AI to create, but AI is a wonderful tool. If you've been using, whether you use Canva or Photoshop or anything else, they all have AI in them. So even the artist using Photoshop using AI. But for me, I may use Whisper app, which is transcribing what I'm saying. That's AI, but I'm able to just brain dump my thoughts. I don't have to worry about structuring my sentences or my paragraphs or a story arc. I can just brain dump an idea. AI is transcribing it. Then I can say, hey, I know I was all over the place. Please restructure my story, my thoughts into a clean story. That again is AI. And because of that, all I have to do is brain dump my human part into it. And then the efficiency comes in by AI making it better content faster, right? Instead of me having to do the rewriting part and the editing part, that's AI. And that means at that point, if I do four of those in one day, that gives me quality and quantity at the same time.
Yep. That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah, it's not slop. I mean, and I think that's what we're living through, especially as marketers, trying to understand that quantity doesn't mean slop, to understand that using AI doesn't mean that we are um, using AI to do all the creativity for us, and realizing that people are going to do it. People are going to cheat. They're going to make crappy AI slop, but that doesn't have to be us. It is a productivity tool. And the fact is, no matter what tool you're using in your creation, whether it be a video tool, audio tool, writing tool, they're going to all have AI in them, or else they won't survive as a software company. So you're going to use AI whether you like it or not if you're creating anything.
Yep. You have to adapt. You have to learn how to use them. I feel like, everyone has AI element. I went to a conference, like I mentioned, and every single software had AI agent or AI dashboard, something AI, right? So, um, as we go on with years, those things, it seems new now, but as, 5, 10 years from now, it's just going to be everyone has it in their system. It's just part of something that we're all going to have to get used to and used to kind of learning the intricacies of each software.
Absolutely. Let me tell you what's on my mind this week. I did a video that surprisingly was more popular than I expected, and it was also part of an experiment. So I don't typically make content that's on trend. I'm working on, educating marketers, doing things that are more evergreen, that have a long tail of life of what they're talking about. They won't expire in a few days or weeks or months. But I was so blown away with something I achieved with Claude last week, which was moving my memory and all my experiences out of ChatGPT and into Claude. Now, I haven't canceled either one of them. I haven't canceled ChatGPT, but I wanted to know, could I make Claude feel like it knew me as well as ChatGPT does? So I did the whole thing and I talked through it in a video to where I ended up taking all my ChatGPT custom GPTs and transferring those into Claude skills. And Claude actually helped me write all the skills in one swoop by looking at a spreadsheet of my prompts that I pulled out of ChatGPT. Mind blown. I couldn't help but share that because it was amazing to me. So I made this video on, and I do a thumbnail that says, before you leave ChatGPT, learn this or watch this video. And that video had well over 100 views before 24 hours passed, which to a YouTuber celebrity, that might be nothing. But for me, 100 and some views under a day is a lot, and it's still growing. But I realized I was trend jacking. I mean, that week it was the same day or two when everybody said, "Oh, leave ChatGPT," and it was hashtag quit GPT and all that. So I said, you know what? Technically, I'm trend jacking. Let's just see how it works. Because a month from now, that video won't mean much of anything because we'll be past that. But it was a successful video. I trend jacked. It won't be evergreen, and so I decided that I'm gonna have a mix. I'm gonna do some trend jacking from time to time, not so much for the purpose of jacking the trend, but for the purpose of giving my audience some on time, timely, useful information, and then mix it in with the evergreen stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, you're talking my language. You're A/B testing. You're seeing what works and what doesn't work. I love it. I do the same thing on LinkedIn. I'll see, trending topics like the one that came out with McDonald's, right? With biting the burger and how that went, viral for the, burger industry. And so I jumped on that trend as well. I usually don't, but I said, you know what? I'm going to jump on and see what happened. So I gave my own take on it, obviously used the image, and that again too, like you saw the results. I saw a bunch of people commenting, engagement on that. And I thought that usually wasn't the case. But again, I don't usually, chase trends, but had the same result you did with ChatGPT and, the virality of that.
Well, I mean, I guess on that situation, that was a story that we all were involved in as marketers. Like you couldn't be a marketer even outside and not have seen the McDonald's CEOs eating this hamburger, and then Burger King jumps on and Arby's, and then
Yep.
all the other restaurants jump on and make their burger eating CEO videos, whatever. And then AI jumps in and makes the whole behind the scenes version of what it must have looked like. That was my
Which
favorite. But the greatest thing is, I mean, it gave us what I've heard called a social object, this thing we're all related to, we can all talk about. But it also gave those businesses a chance to tell their story. And whether it's authentic or not, they began talking and telling their stories. And we began learning things about the burger industry we probably never cared to know, but we learned because they were telling their stories, which ties into what we're talking about today in terms of telling your story as a business and not losing your soul, uh, creating content, using AI, but not letting AI create your content. It all lends into a business that can tell a story. And so we're going to get into an interview here in a moment with a person who is a global expert on strategic storytelling and real communication. She's a successful podcast. She has one called Keeping It Real with Jack and Real. She is also the best-selling author of 7 books, including her new book called Story Intelligence, The Craft of Authentic Storytelling. If you look for her book, her name is Gabrielle Dolan. But once you know her, you'll know she goes by Rel. So right now, check out the conversation. Enjoy.
So I went down a rabbit hole through your LinkedIn
Uh-huh.
videos and really enjoyed your little your campaign that you have going on, your 31 days of storytelling
Hmm.
videos there. And there was one in particular that I really enjoyed. where you talked about how your niece asked you for advice about her presentation. And you talked about vulnerability. So you said that that's obviously a very important aspect of storytelling. Is there such a thing as too much vulnerability in a story?
Yes, there is. Absolutely, there is. So I say to people, when you share a personal story, it doesn't have to be vulnerable. People think, oh, vulnerability, it's got to be getting people crying or you crying or showing some, really like almost inner demons or whatever about yourself. And it doesn't have to be that. There are some stories that are absolutely more vulnerable than others. I would say most stories are not vulnerable, but the fact that you're revealing just something little about yourself shows some vulnerability. And it actually not even shows vulnerability. You have to be a little bit vulnerable to actually share it. But there are times when it is too much. So I often say to people, heal before you reveal, as in it could be something quite traumatic that happened to you, but it happened 20 years ago and you've healed from it and you can share it without people feeling sorry for you. But if it happened like a few months ago, it still might be raw. And what that ends up is like you might be getting too emotional, which impacts the result. And you know what? The result is probably people start to feel sorry for you, which is probably not what you were doing. I do see people that deliberately share vulnerable stories. It's almost like a manipulation tool. Um, I read an article once, and this someone said the 4 types of stories you need as a leader, and one of them was the tearjerker. And I thought, oh my God, if you are starting from a place that I'm sharing this story to get people crying, that's manipulation. And I think people can sense that. I think people can sense that that's the reason you're sharing it, as opposed to the reason we should be sharing any story is to get the message across.
So you're saying it's the message and not seeking a certain emotion.
Yeah, no, and you don't have to, like, some people go, what type of emotion do you want people to feel? Like, I don't decide on what emotion you want people to feel. People will feel emotion. You decide on the message. So, yeah, in my advice to my niece, she sort of said, I hate talking about myself because I feel like I'm bragging. And I just, my advice to her was have some form of vulnerability in your stories, but that could just be the lesson I learnt. So, what I learnt from that, or the regret I have about that. So that's you got to have some level of vulnerability, but not vulnerability for vulnerability's sake.
How does that play into the idea of, I think it was Maya Angelou who said, they won't remember what you said, they'll remember how you made them feel. So if we can hold those two things as true, is it about the intention? Like you do want them to leave feeling something, but you don't
Yep.
want to intentionally go after a goal of trying to make them feel a certain way.
Yeah, yeah. So to me, that's the difference between influence and manipulation. I mean, you think as leaders, as brand people, when we're selling, we want to influence an out. Even as parents, right? We want to influence an outcome. We want people to think, feel, or do something different. And we influence throughout every day of our life. Manipulation. So influence to me is win-win. Like this is good for you, but I want you to do it. Manipulation is when it's not. So yeah, I mean, and that quote ties in beautifully with storytelling, because what story does is in our human brain, it taps into emotion, and a good story will do that. Whether people they will have no control over it. A good story taps into emotion, and as we know with emotion, it makes us feel something, and that's actually why we remember a story. If you can sometimes think of great presenters you've seen, and I will say to people, what was I? And I'll go, I remember the story they told, and I will say, well, do you remember anything else from that presentation? And I go, no, I just remember the story. So the reason stories are so sticky, the reason that people remember the message and remember the story is because it taps into emotion. And so, yeah, it's absolutely, they won't remember what you said, they won't remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And that's through, I mean, that can be through a gesture or whatever, but a story taps into emotion.
I think you brought up another story in that video series about going to the 9/11 museum and not remembering the stats,
Yep.
right? And immediately you remember the stats in that moment, but once you leave, what you remember the most are the traumatic and very inspirational stories that came out of that.
Yeah, yeah, and that happens. People sort of go, "Oh, we need, you need to give them all the data." It's like we hear all this information, and you sort of go, "Oh, that's interesting," and she can't remember it. But the stories will you'll remember forever. And yeah, and in that video, I talk about taking my daughter to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, and you know, she walked out and asked me, "Mum, how tall did the guy say that column was?" And I couldn't remember what it said, even though it was interesting at the time. But there's some stories I heard there that I'll remember for the rest of my life.
So your book, your latest book, goes deeper into. I guess you do a lot of speaking to businesses,
Hmm.
and so when you're talking about storytelling in this context, it's often how do businesses do it. So tell us about the books. I have several questions about it, but I want you to give your version, the author's overview of what the book's about.
Yeah, yeah. So you're right. The work I do is I go into businesses and teach their leaders how to share stories more effectively in business. So whether they're communicating values or strategies or purpose, or trying to connect to their customers or employees better, how they do that through stories. So communicating through stories. I think the last time I was on your podcast, it was based on my story Magnetic Stories, which was I wrote. Oh, it's almost 5 years ago now, and I truly believe that would be the last book I wrote on storytelling. But what started to happen, and this started to happen probably around about 18 months ago, is I would have more and more people in my workshops ask me, "Will AI replace storytelling?" And I was actually quite horrified with the question. It was like, "No, why would you even think that's the case?" But more and more people ask me, and, I would go, "No," like, and then I started to think in a world of AI content, there's so much AI content out there, you don't even know what's real and what's not, that our authentic stories are needed now more than ever. But then I had people ask me, "Can you use AI to help with your stories?" And my initial response was no. Though no, that would be cheating. It wouldn't be authentic. It wouldn't
Hmm.
be real. And I thought, maybe I better, if I'm sort of the expert on this, maybe I better actually start to test it. And I was disarmingly surprised how good AI was with generating stories. And while it was good, it lacked something, and what it lacked is authenticity. What it lacked is you sort of read the story and people go, "There's something that's not quite right there,"
Hmm.
and because it's not true, because it's AI written. So the premise of the book is, in a world of AI content and in a world of distrust, that our stories are needed now more than ever, but used wisely, you can use AI as your creative partner, but used wisely is the key word here. And you don't want to lose your voice throughout it. So predominantly, it's still a storytelling book. It's called Story Intelligence, so predominantly it's a storytelling book. But the tagline, "The Craft of Authentic Storytelling Made Smarter with AI," um, shows that it does bring in some elements of how you can use AI in the process.
So the timing of this conversation could not be better because I just finished putting together a presentation for a couple of talks I have coming up. And they are on how to use AI to scale content. And
Mhm.
that talk has evolved over time because I'm focusing more on the human input part of it to do what you just said, to make sure that it's not AI slop and there's human input. And so I had this framework called the POET framework, which is proof, opinion, experience, and trust. And so what we did in using AI is to look at some companies' existing content, and some honestly had AI content they've written since 2022. It was
Y
fluffy AI content.
Yep.
And so we said, look, let's take this old content, run it through the POET framework, and develop questions to ask your executives, your leaders. And so when we run it through the framework, their idea or their existing article, it spits out questions that you take to your CEO or to your SME and say, it'll give us two questions that are proof, two questions to pull out opinion, two questions to pull out experience, and then questions to pull out some trust factors in
Mhm.
there. And so I feel what you're saying about bringing that human factor. And that allows us to actually get the human part out. So let me ask you this. When we do that, give us some tips on creating those questions to help pull out stories.
Yeah.
Because we're getting opinions and we're getting experience, and sometimes they lead into stories. But how can we do more to nurture those stories out of executives?
Yeah, okay. There's a lot in that question. So let me unpack some of the thoughts that are going around in my head at the moment. There is no doubt that AI, when it comes to content generation, can make it more efficient. I use AI, right? If I've got, I
Hmm.
think I want to do some blog ideas. You mentioned my 31 days of story intelligence. I used AI to go give me some suggestions for 31 days. Now, some of them were like crap and I didn't use them, but I use AI. I often say to people, it's efficient. It definitely is more efficient, but don't lose effectiveness through the efficiency. So, when it comes to communication, I think we should be aiming for effective over efficient. Some of the things I say when it comes specifically to storytelling. So it's probably similar when you're talking about experience here. Like if you're trying to get people to think of experience, and then how you turn that into a well-told story is through a framework. But for example, if you were giving a presentation on innovation to your team, and you wanted to go, okay, I've read Gabrielle's book, and she says that a personal story is really good. So I want to think of a personal story around innovation. I would get into AI and say, act as my storytelling coach. I need to give a presentation on innovation, and I want to share a personal experience or story, whatever. Ask me questions that will help me do it. And you're getting AI to ask you questions, because the
Hmm.
reality is, if you and I were having a coffee and you wanted a personal story, the first thing I do is ask you questions. So you got to get clear on the message. Like, first of all, what does innovation mean to you? Then, well, when have you experienced that? When have you done it? And, I do talk about the 4 different types of stories in the book, and one's personal, which I think are the most powerful, but they're the most underutilized. And then the other one's the professional, which is probably the most used, and they're still effective. And that's what your poet thing would be getting experience when you ask for experience or opinions. They will be thinking of work-related stories. So it's helping you find that. What AI will do then is say, just give me a few little details of what happened, and it will turn it into a story. Now, that's when you got to be really careful, because you can fall into the trap of saying, oh, that sounds good. But A, is it true? Did it really happen? And does it sound like you? So when that happens, what I say is you go through it and go, that actually didn't happen. So AI just made that up. It didn't happen, but this happened. And so talk about what that happened then, and make sure it's true. And I also say it out loud. And if it's words that you wouldn't normally use, or, if it just doesn't sound like something you would say, then don't use it, and don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, that sounds good. It might sound
Mm,
good, but does it sound
but
like
is it
you?
true?
And whether you is an individual or a
Yeah.
company, does it sound like you? I did it, just as a quick one. I did something a couple of weeks ago, and I was filling out a form actually to go on another podcast, and it said, just give me 3 paragraphs on what you. So one of the things was, I teach business people how to communicate more effectively through sharing authentic stories. That was one of the things I said. It came back and said, I teach people to communicate authentically via stories that bridge the gap between impact and trust. And I just like, I don't even know what that means.
It's a
And
word salad.
it's and you know what the
Yes,
point is? It could be, yeah, but I reckon there's a lot of people that go, oh, that sounds good. And they would have it as their tagline, I bridge the gap between impact and truth and trust, or whatever. Like, so yeah.
That reminds me of, there's a book for web designers that came out years ago, and it's been kind of a Bible for web designers. And the book was called Don't Make Them Think. And
Yeah.
so whenever I read that kind of, especially AI content, if I have to pause and reread the sentence to figure out what it really meant, it's not a good sentence. Like,
Yeah.
if it's making you think about the words instead of the thought, it isn't a good sentence. So, so you mentioned the 4 types of stories. Tell us more
Mhm.
about those 4.
Yeah, so the 4 types are, they all start with P because I do love it when I can make things start with the same letter. So personal stories. So these are things that have happened to you personally or you've observed, but they didn't happen at work. So they're non-work related, but you use them to attach to a work message. So if you're trying to communicate, these are really, really powerful when it comes to communicating company values. So if one of your company values is integrity, for example, I take people through the process to go, well, what does that really mean to you? Don't worry what the company says it means. What does it mean to you? And then have a personal story for that. So it could be a story about when you were growing up or a story about your kids or whatever. So that's personal story. The professional story is, again, it's happened to you or someone in your team, but you were sort of there and you were first-hand experience, but it's a work-related story. So those two stories are really powerful. I think the most common story people use are the professional. Job interviews, for example. That's your job interviews are going to be a lot of professional stories, but I also say you can absolutely share a personal story in a job interview. So personal, professional, and then the other two are public and parables. So public is like, they're almost like case studies. You hear stories about, Steve Jobs and did something, and if you just Google it, you'll find it. So it's like it's in the public domain. They're often well-told stories. Now they can have an impact as well. You just sort of want to make sure they're not overused cliche stories. And then the parables are they're like Aesop's fables. The boy who cried wolf type thing. A lot of teachers use parables a lot. So
Yeah, that's how my dad taught me. As I think back on what I
yeah,
was taught, all my best lessons from my dad almost were all
Why
parables.
do they
yeah.
rhyme? Sometimes they rhyme. I think the remembering thing that, you remember when you rhyme. So I have the same experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? You can even sometimes you can combine them. Like it could be so you could, for example, have this parable that you really remember your dad told you, and you start sharing the story about, when I was a little kid, my dad would always tell us this parable, and you share the parable. So it's the parable's got the message in it, but the fact that your dad told you and you remember it from a kid sort of starts to make it a personal story, but it's got a parable included in it.
Yeah, and the professional and the public too, we see those when we ask an executive, um, tell us about when. Like
Yeah.
often our formula will spit out in the experience column. It'll read some case study or something that they did with the client, and that'll come out as tell us about the time you did this,
Yeah.
or tell us about your company's pivot, or tell us about, and then it'll pull out something that was, even if it was a fluff AI version of it, once it goes to a human and says, tell us about your experience in this thing happening, and then we get a wonderful story.
Yeah. You know what I also find a really powerful question, which you're welcome to use, is ask them, how did you feel when that
Mm,
happened? So, like, because what that does is takes it away from what can start to feel like a case study. It was like, well, this happened and this is what we did, and we rallied the troops and and this was the result or whatever. So, that's sort of where they normally start. But if you go, if you sort of go, well, back up when that happened there, like sometimes executives will go, so we just had to make the decision to do this, right? And that will be, and you go, okay, so that sounds like a pretty big decision. Tell me how you personally went through that, and they'll go, oh, it's you know what, it was probably one of the really tough decisions. I remember, I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. I remember my wife saying, will you just bloody relax? And they bring in all this stuff and you go, that's the story. So, saying sometimes them saying, I actually felt really, really proud of what we achieved can make it start to feel personal. Or I was, to this day, I'm really disappointed that we were never able to achieve what we originally thought we could do. So asking them how they felt and even going, can you remember going home that night, or can you remember what you did? And then, they'll say things like, yeah, I remember I had to just go and leave and go for a walk around the block to clear my head and things like that. But they leave out those details initially because they think, well, that's not business. That's irrelevant. They think it's irrelevant, but it's actually the most powerful bit in the story.
Yeah. because a lot of people have gone
Excellent.
through it. Maybe they weren't part of that professional, but everyone has gone through, feeling alienated or whatever the emotion is. They felt that in that specific moment in a different, situation for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see a lot of leaders and even like companies like go, we want to come across as approachable. We want to be more human. Like you hear that a lot now. Leaders need to be more human. Um and I was like, the only way you can be human is actually to share your feelings. Like it's like,
Yeah.
and I've seen like, CEOs and senior execs, and when they start talking about something that happened when they were a kid, or they start talking about their kids, and, their kid turned to me and said, "What would you know, mum?" or "What would you know, dad?" And it was like everyone in the audience goes, "Oh, wow, they have to do the same, you know, human stuff we all have to do." And the leader's thinking, "Well, of course I do. Like, what do they think I don't?" And it was like, no, they don't think you do because you hold a position of power. So, bringing in how you feel, not being dramatic. It could literally be one sentence. I actually felt really proud. It could be as simple as that.
Touching on the whole, brandness and being authentic. To you, who do you think is doing it right? What brands stick out to you now for being very authentic and human?
I probably don't. This may seem political, but the really latest one with Anthropic making the decision to not use their products, to not allow the American government to use their products for surveillance and for, wasn't it going to be they could shoot weapons without human
Yeah.
intervention?
Autonomous
Yeah,
weaponry.
autonomous
Yeah.
weapons. For them to make that decision, could you imagine that? That was a pretty big decision they had to make. But to me, that's a great example of sticking with their original mission and purpose and values of the company. Um, so that when I think of authentic, it's like, are you sticking true to the values that you've said? It's just a congruence between what you say and what you do, and that's when there's a lack of authenticity, when there's a disconnect between what you say our values are and what you actually do.
So to wrap this up, if you're talking to a marketer, the marketer. Oh, by the way, I want to go on record to say there's been a wave in the past, I guess, 6 or 7 months of there was an article. Maybe you could tell me one of you where it came from. Was it Wall Street? It says, "Oh, now the new job is
Wall Street
storytelling." Who
Journal,
said
yeah,
that?
Wall Street
Wall Street
Journal.
Journal. So, on the record, you were writing your book long before that, and you have several books on storytelling before that. So, I can only imagine as an author, you must have been like, "Wow, great, new flames to the fire of what I'm about to release," right?
Yeah, that article sparked different thoughts in my head. One of it was, yeah, because I've been teaching this for 21 years, and 21 years ago, like, people would go, "What has storytelling got to do with business? Like, I'm a leader. Why would I need storytelling?" So it wasn't a thing. And now the fact that I read an article that says, I think it was LinkedIn jobs, like it was like the term storyteller in titles is the biggest growing title, right? So part of me went, "Wow." See, it's like part of me goes, I knew there was something
I've
in
been
this
right all
storytelling. I
along.
knew, I was right all along. It's like, how many times do I have to say, "I told you so," right? So part of me was that. My concern was that we're thinking, okay, so we need to bring storytelling into our organization. Let's hand that over to the chief storytelling officer. And what I'm find is it's marketing people are just now calling themselves storytellers. My thing is every single one of your employees is a storyteller. All your leaders are storyteller, and especially your, frontline facing staff or partners that deal with clients, they're the storytellers in your organization. And so to me is you need to train all of them to help them find stories but share them more effectively. Now, yes, can you have an internal department that manages that and looks after that and makes sure the stories are being found and heard internally and heard externally and being implemented in induction programs, and that you absolutely can have that. But I would say, that's the danger. That's the danger when we go, well, we've got a chief storytelling officer, so now they're in charge of stories.
So that's my final question. What does a marketer do? They say, "Okay, I get it. We need to tell stories. where do I start?
It's interesting. The vast majority of the time I go into organizations, it's either through the CEO or the head of business that sees it, or the head of communications. Initially, it was the head of like internal communications, and then the head of people and culture. So, or organizational development. They're the ones that normally bring me in. The marketers very rarely bring me in because I think with marketing, they see storytelling as the overarching narrative. So that's what I see with marketers. What's our overarching narrative? And it does come back to, well, this is our brand, and our brand are these values and what we want to be known for, and who's our target audience and what stories we can be telling them. But I think as marketers, I think you can absolutely go, what are the types of stories that we should be sharing, both internally and externally, that communicates what we want to be known for. And I would say it's not necessarily about the product. I mean, surely it can be about the product and service, but it's what we want to be known for. And that to me comes back to values. Like, do we want to be known as the trusted advisor? Do we want to be known as innovative? Do we want to be known for exceptional customer service? You've got to find those stories and share them. And I guess finally, it's not like one or two or three big stories. It's how you keep finding those day-to-day stories. If you want to be known as for exceptional customer service, you got to be on the lookout for employees that are delivering great service, and find that and share the stories about them, both internally, but also externally.
Wonderful. Well, that about wraps it up, unless you have another question, Rocio.
No, that was really good. I'm over here like I really want to write notes, but I don't want to look like I'm not paying attention because I'm a note taker.
Well,
I
hey, you
love
got.
note information.
Hey, you sure show you have notes.
Yeah. Well, you can listen back on the episode and
Go back.
take notes.
Yeah.
Then
I lived it, but I'm gonna go.
Absolutely. I love to ask, the where do I start questions, because it gives you some meat to actually get some action done. So your book, tell us where to find it and where to find you if we want to work with you.
Yeah, so the book's available on all, normal Amazon, like all the global online stores. It's available in paperback and ebook at the moment. An audio version will be coming out in May. But it seems to be, it reached number one on 4 different categories on Amazon's hot new releases, like, workplace communication and presentations and running meetings. So very, very happy. I think, as you said, it's timely and relevant. LinkedIn is my most active social media platform. So that's where I'm currently, we're doing the 31 days of story intelligence over March. So just Gabrielle Dolan on LinkedIn. And yes, on my website's gabrielledolan.com. But yeah, the book's a good place to start.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and we really enjoyed
Thank you
it.
so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
Thanks for listening to The Business of Marketing. I'm Rocio Osuna.
And I'm A. Lee Judge.
Catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Marketing podcast, a show brought to you by ContentMonster.com, the producer of B2B digital marketing content. Show notes can be found on ContentMonster.com, as well as ALeeJudge.com.